I have an absolutely terrifying update for you on the coup in Bolivia to report. This is from a publication called Morning Star, and it's about the self-appointed president of Bolivia, Janine Áñez, and she said the following, quote, "The personnel of the armed forces who participate in operations for the restoration of order and public stability will be exempt from criminal responsibility when they act in legitimate defense," the decree reads. It also specifies that security forces may use firearms to put down protests. She has given them carte blanche to murder protesters, to use violence, to use force, to stop peaceful protesters. Remember, this is in response to the last update I gave you, mentioned how the biggest trade union announced a general strike. And so there's a lot of protesters out there, and the only people backing Janine Áñez are the police and the military. And so she turned around now and said, oh, you can do whatever you want to stop the protest, whatever you have to do. You want to murder people? Go ahead and murder people. It's stunning to me that anybody thought that this wasn't a coup. When you looked at how it unfolded early on, it was crystal clear that that's what was happening, that it was a coup. Again, the biggest evidence in that direction was when Morales came out and said, oh, fine, if you want to have another election, we'll have another election, fine. He had won, and won by over 10 percentage points, which meant there wasn't a second round, there wasn't a runoff election. But he said, hey, listen, no problem. Let's have another election if you want to have another election. Weird way to steal an election, to say, okay, I won, but fine, I'll give you guys a do-over. Weird way to do that, huh? Again, if you wanted to criticize him about, trying to get rid of term limits and then the Supreme Court getting rid of the term limits, and you said, hey, if you're a president, you should never be in a position where you're sitting president and you're agreeing in principle to get rid of the term limits. I understand that argument. That argument makes sense. But the Supreme Court ruled what it ruled, and he didn't stack the court, unlike what a lot of people are saying. The Supreme Court ruled what it ruled. So let's say in the U.S., the Supreme Court ruled, I'm sorry, that, term limits are actually unconstitutional and they're undemocratic. If somebody ran for a third term, the U.S., we wouldn't say, our media wouldn't say, and the people wouldn't say that that's not allowed. We'd say, hey, the Supreme Court ruled what it ruled. That's the law. If he wants to do it, he could do it. She wants to do it, she could do it. But in the case of Bolivia, people use that as this main argument as to why, he's an illegitimate leader and this and that, and that's just nonsense. And of course, we went over in detail Morales' results as president of Brazil, and it was really good. He massively reduced poverty. He massively reduced extreme poverty, increased the minimum wage, kept inflation under control, built 1,000 clinics and gymnasiums and hospitals and all this stuff. Very good, strong social democratic record. And, he's indigenous, and now you have people who are non-indigenous really taking power. And remember, Janine Áñez, and we went over the tweets on the last update, she said many anti-indigenous things on Twitter very casually. So the other point that I wanted to make is her party also got 4.2% of the vote in the recent elections. So they are like a fringe party, really not popular at all. So the way she's getting power and holding on to power is through force. It's the police and it's the military who have backed her, and I'm sure they have backing from the U.S. government as well. So here we are. And finally, they said, we will prosecute journalists for sedition. So no free speech, no free press, no free protests. And the duly elected leader had to flee from the country. This is 100% a coup. We know it's a coup. When it should have been a big hint to everybody when she was going into the palace holding a freaking giant Bible, saying, finally, the Bible returns to the palace. Because right-wing coups and fundamentalist religion always go hand in hand, and that's exactly what we saw in this instance.